Hello and welcome back to my venture across the United States, where I'm going to visit each state and cover some of the urban legends and local mythology present in them. Today, we're visiting Indiana, the Hoosier state. Now, growing up, I always thought that you'd be more likely to find maybe some duct tape in an old decrepit mansion than a ghost in Indiana, but it turns out my notions were wrong. So come with me today as we walk through the mansions and haunted bridges of Indiana, taking a deeper dive into the creepier corners of the state. Number 1 is the Culbertson Mansion. In New Albany, Indiana, there's a mansion with a troubled history that's said to harbor plenty of spirits which were reluctant to move on to the next life. This mansion comes from a time when New Albany was involved in the construction of ships. In short, a Dr. Webb purchased and moved into this home with his family in 1933. He was practicing out of the home, but it began to be noticed that a conspicuous number of these patients were going missing. And that's when the strange noises and the awful smell started coming from the basement. Eventually, a patient arrived for their appointment, only to find that they couldn't actually get into the house. So they contacted the police, as you do. These officers then arrived on the scene, and they found quite the gruesome display. The whole family was dead, they'd all been tortured, and secret passages were dug under the home, where the missing patients had been experimented on and buried. Like with all horrible things, though, the mess was cleaned up and the home was sold, but the new buyer noticed a lot of unexplained things were occurring. The electricity was a bit buggy, some of their belongings went missing, and things they couldn't explain were taking place. It didn't take long before the new tenants found a good excuse for these occurrences. Nowadays, this home offers and markets itself as a literal haunted home, going so far as to dress up as a haunted house around Halloween, with the museum curators claiming that they've seen their fair share of apparitions. Number 2 are the haunted bridges of Indiana. Now, researching Indiana, I found no shortage of haunted bridges, so rather than covering one of them, I thought I'd cover them together as a general word of warning that if you plan to pass over a bridge in Indiana, you'd best be ready to run. Perhaps the most famous bridge in Indiana is in Avon, which runs over White Lick Creek and was built in the 1950s. The story tells of a workplace incident, perhaps because of its mishandling, which became a ghost story. In short, a worker was helping to build this bridge when his platform collapsed and he fell into a cement vat, slowly sinking inside. Other workers couldn't make it in time to help him, and despite the claims that he was heard knocking on the walls, rather than destroy the vat and collect him or his body, they decided to leave him in the vat. So how do you think this turned out? Of course, for years after this incident, men claimed to hear knocking and screaming inside of the cement pylon, and there have even been sightings of a man trying to flag down trains along the tracks. This is a well-trafficked railroad, and so this probably helped perpetuate the rumors of this ghostly worker who never got the chance to leave and go home. There's also the Edna Collins Bridge. Supposedly many horrible things happened here, such as a drowning near the bridge in the 1920s and a subsequent hanging. But the drowning specifically of Edna Collins is what made it famous. As the story goes, a little girl named Edna Collins frequently swam in the creek this bridge passes over. When her parents would come to get her, they'd honk 3 times to let her know that it was time to come up. And as you'd expect, one day these honks yielded no response, and it was found that the poor girl had drowned. At this point, I bet you know how you summon Edna's ghost, don't you? You definitely do. If you do drive to this bridge today, first you turn your car off, and then, you guessed it, you honk 3 times. The story goes that Edna will in fact get into your car. Some people have said that they found foot and handprints of a child in their car after this, and that they hear a little girl laughing sometimes. Adequately creepy in my book. Now, finally, there's Dogface Bridge. I'm including this one because I think it's absolutely absurd, and I love a wild folklore story. In short, a couple was apparently driving over a bridge in Sanpierre, Indiana, when a dog ran out in front of them, and they swerved to avoid it, as you do. They went off the bridge, and they died. For some reason now, the legend says that if you visit this bridge, you might see a woman's body lying on the ground, but when you go to look at her face, she has a dog's head. Trust me, I don't get how that happened either, but regardless, if you do see this, you should probably run because apparently this dog lady will eat you. Anyways, there's also been claims that bodies have been found here and that there are strange animal sounds around the bridge. Admittedly, I searched for any reports of bodies found here in the news and couldn't find anything credible, but it happened a long time ago, and hey, it's a great story at least. Number 3 is Dianna of the Dunes. Now, how could I leave a national park ghost story off of this list? Alice Mabel Gray, the woman known as Dianna of the Dunes, was a very real person, and she lived in Chesterton, Indiana, devoting her life to bringing attention to the Dunes National Park area, and she helped establish the area as a nature preserve that became the Dunes National Park that you know today. Some say that Alice, or perhaps Dianna, never really left the shores of Lake Michigan after her passing, though. They say that if you're walking the shores, you might get a glimpse of a woman running along a beach, or perhaps diving into Lake Michigan. And if you do, you might be running into Alice. Plenty of ghost hunters have claimed that something is going on in the dunes, but it has yet to be determined if that something is Alice herself. Number 4 is the 100 Step Cemetery. Now, Brazil, Indiana isn't famous for a lot, but it is apparently famous for more than just David Goggins. It also has a cemetery, which supposedly holds a special secret, perhaps one that you don't want to know. The story goes a few ways, depending on who tells it, as many of these stories go, but the most common way that it goes is that there's a set of stairs in a cemetery in Brazil, Indiana, that if you walk up and down, you must count to 100 as you go in each direction. They say that if you don't do this, you'll be destined to die soon. There's also a version that I think is a bit creepier, that if you walk up the stairs and count to 100, that as you do it, an undertaker will appear and it will show you how you die. However, if you do the same thing on the way back down, the vision you just saw won't come true. And there's also a legend that kind of circumvents what you're probably thinking. If you skip the steps and just walk up on the grass, you will be supposedly pushed over or pushed down the hill or something by a ghost that lives inside the cemetery. Or perhaps the very undertaker that showed you the visions of your own death. And, you know, it's theory time, and this is wild, but, you know, maybe David Goggins did stair repeats here, and that's why he's so hard. Can't be a coincidence, right? Number 5 is the Crosley Monster. Now everybody's got a Bigfoot, including Indiana it seems. This one apparently resides near Jennings County, Indiana, located conveniently only about an hour drive from Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and Louisville. Coincidence? I think not, but joking aside, the legend has been bumping around Indiana since the first Europeans visited Indiana. One of the first reports that documented this creature is from December of 1839. It was in a newspaper which spoke of a wild child covered in fur seen in Michigan City, Indiana. A similar report was made in 1860, and then another in 1937, all of these describing some sort of cross between a man, an ape, and a sloth stalking the area. That's new. Reports supposedly persist today, especially in the Crosley State Fish and Wildlife Area, where an 8-foot-tall man-ape hybrid creature can occasionally be seen or heard howling in the distance. One particularly fun personal account comes from July 2006, where 4 boys on a campout in the Fish and Wildlife Area heard something wandering through the woods, only to peer into the forest and see a large creature standing on 2 legs staring at them with glowing eyes at the tree line. Apparently, after it noticed the boys, it leapt towards them, trying to attack, dropping to 4 limbs to run even faster, and it chased them all the way to the road, at which point the monster dashed off into a cornfield. It apparently appeared to harass one of these boys a couple of weeks later too, when he was in the same area, and according to the boy, it seemed like it was only toying with him rather than actually threatening him. So what do you think? Does this seem realistic to you? Have you had an interesting or similar Bigfoot encounter? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all for coming with me today on this brisk walk through the state of Indiana. If you liked this video, please hit that subscribe button and give it a like so that I can provide you with more of this content. Also, go ahead and hit that alert button so that you're told when my next video drops on the state of Iowa. If nothing else, next time you're passing over a bridge and you hear a scream, maybe think twice before you peer over the edge to see if you can offer a helping hand. But most importantly, whether you're being chased by Bigfoot's brother or taking that 99th step in Brazil, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.